A family day trip becomes a delicious journey of self-discovery.
Here's the famous cheddar gorge.
Phenomenal!
Cine camera, all that kitchen gear.
Dear, oh dear, oh dear.
Mutton dressed as lamb.
Tell me what you think I'm like.
He's only a boy.
Would you say I was nubile?
You gone mad or what?
The Gorge, the Wednesday play, Wednesday at 9 on BBC Two.
BBC Two now digs up the dirt on stone cleaning in Scotland with one foot in the past.
Welcome to One Foot in the Past. This week we're in Glasgow to ask whether the cleaning of Scotland's buildings is doing more harm than good. Also this week, Peter York looks at how a castle can be made to earn its keep in the modern age. And George Melly celebrates the surreal splendours of Sefton Park in Liverpool. Is a cleaner building a better building? That's the debate that's raging here in Scotland at the moment. For 20 years, in the name of urban regeneration, councils have been trying to make our historic buildings look as good as new. But controversial new scientific research suggests that modern cleaning methods might damage rather than protect some buildings. In Edinburgh and Glasgow, the battle lines have been drawn up as the pro and anti-stone cleaners go to war. Before the stone cleaning boom of the 70s and 80s, Edinburgh and Glasgow had many dark and black buildings. Central Edinburgh was called Old Reekie, and Glasgow was infamous for its gloomy and dismal feel. Now all that's just a distant memory. Scotland's grandest buildings have been washed of their dirt, and architectural features lost for years behind grime have re-emerged.
The public perception, I think, was that cleaner buildings meant a cleaner environment. Visitors to the city, we know, appreciate seeing the cleaned buildings and now draw attention to dirty buildings.
One of the great joys for me as a Glaswegian is standing at bus stops or standing in pubs and just listening to people talk about their own city. People who haven't got the faintest idea who I am or what I do for a living, and just share their sense of renewed joy as to what's round about them. That was something you could not hear 20 years ago.
Early cleaning used abrasive methods such as sandblasting, but this softened and damaged fine detail on buildings. So when chemical cleaning came in the 1980s, it was seen as a breakthrough. With chemicals, the dirt came off easily. By far the most effective method was using hydrofluoric acid. It was applied to the building and then washed off with water under high pressure. The results were spectacular, but there were to be some unforeseen consequences. Every house in Edinburgh's Rutland Square was built at the same time in the same sandstone, but now almost every one is a different colour. Conservationists, also upset by the careless applications of chemicals, began to ask what was happening to the sandstone to make it different colours, and why did colours continue to change long after the cleaning process had finished. Some buildings were far more orange than others, almost rusty in appearance. On other newly cleaned buildings, white streaks and patches appeared. But the most disturbing phenomenon of all was the greening effect. Buildings cleaned just a few years before began to turn green. Worst affected was the sculpture, and Scotland's best buildings are covered with important sculptures. They were going green fastest. Clean to green in 6 months became the refrain of the anti-stone cleaners, who felt something had gone seriously wrong. Geologist Brian Bluck, together with sculpture conservator Jane Porter, believe they've discovered the problem. They claim chemicals should never be applied to stone and that nobody recognised the natural porosity of sandstone.
The problem is that when we use chemicals on the building, we increase its porosity. It's like a sponge, it's breathing.
moisture's going into it. If we use chemicals, we create holes, micro space holes in the building. Water gets in much, much deeper, and as soon as it gets in, we essentially see chemical reactions or biological reactions going on, which modify greatly the surface of the stone.
Sculptures will take the brunt of it because they have a very much more vulnerable surface. They're highly carved, and having weathered much faster, they had a much thicker soiling and patina. So they had to use more chemicals to remove the patina. So therefore they're far more porous, and therefore they are holding a lot more water.
Bluck and Porter's findings are controversial. They claim that chemical cleaning has caused what could be the architectural equivalent of cancer in the stone. According to them, the chemicals do not stay on the surface, but travel right into the stone, making it far more porous and upsetting its mineral makeup. They point to the white streaks on clean buildings as evidence that the chemicals are inside the stone long after cleaning. In dry weather, chemical salts crystallize on the surface. Secondly, they claim that as water gets further inside the stone because of cleaning, essential ions in the stone are washed out towards the surface. This causes the rusting or orange effect. Eventually, the newly iron-saturated surface crumbles away, leaving a sandy and weakened interior. In effect, the sandstone returns to being sand. Thirdly, they say, as the stone gets more and more sponge-like and waterlogged because of the extra microholes caused by cleaning, algae and microorganisms colonize. This causes greening. Bluck and Porter argue that in the long term, as the algae die as well as multiply, it will mean green and black slimy buildings, much worse than the original blackening. But their theories are fiercely contested by others in the conservation world, who argue there's just as much algae on dirty buildings. It's just that it's less noticeable.
The reason why buildings are going green is because of the Clean Air Act. When I was younger, you could hardly see from one end of a street to the other because of the pollution that was in the air. Practically the only thing you could grow in gardens were very, very basic plants like privet hedges and so on. Nowadays, with the Clean Air Act, things have changed, and algae is just growing everywhere, whether it's in a building which has been cleaned or a building which has not been cleaned.
Now, the guardian of Scotland's architectural heritage, Historic Scotland, is reconsidering where it stands. Until recently, it supported stone cleaning as part of an overall restoration. But now, even Historic Scotland has its doubts.
The dramatic changes that have taken place in the limestone parts of the country, most notably London, where the jet black facades suddenly were almost transformed overnight into gleaming white, spectacular buildings. The enthusiasm was there. We were somewhat, I think, in Scotland seduced, however, by that transformation. There are good conservation reasons for cleaning limestone, but these were transmitted into the sandstone regions of the country and into Scotland without necessarily thinking it through.
I find Historic Scotland's position amazingly negative when you can see the positive results that have happened in this city. They themselves have been putting out a guide to stone cleaning, a stone cleaning practitioner's handbook, and it would strike me as astonishing as if, having paid for this, they're now turning around and telling people, well, okay, we have a stone cleaning handbook, but you can't stone clean buildings.
But if Historic Scotland put the pressure on, would you be prepared to come back at them?
I would be prepared to come back as hard as I know how.
As the row rages over Bluck and Porter's research, it's reopened the whole question of whether Edinburgh and Glasgow's buildings look better clean. Some people have begun to question the very basis of the whole stone cleaning fashion, arguing that much of what's been called dirt is really natural weathering.
People from the south tend to find Scots and Northern English buildings dark and perhaps satanic. But in many places in Edinburgh, buildings grow out of the natural weathered rock. There is an affinity between the architecture, the colour of the material, and the rocks on which they sit. It is quite unnatural for us to want our sandstone buildings to look like southern limestone buildings.
A philosophical argument has been adopted by some people, which effectively makes a virtue out of filth. And I find this a really very eccentric notion. The same people don't object to cleaning paintings or books or sculptures. Suddenly buildings have taken on this notion that they should be kept dirty.
The stone cleaning debate is now a full-blown battle as pro and anti fight to gain the conservation high ground. But Black and Porter insist they will be proved right.
When this peels off, the politicians have to realise that a quick, bright fix for the city really might mean at the end of the day that we're going to green it so much faster, we're going to get black buildings so much faster, and we are going to start the whole cleaning process again. And whenever we start cleaning, we're going to open the pore space of the building again, we're going to allow more moisture into it, and at the end of the day, we're going to clean buildings so often that you might as well just replace them.
The whole dispute is about to come to a head now that Edinburgh District Council wants to clean the Black and Scott monument. It's a dramatic test case and the subject of a public inquiry. The decision rests with the Scottish Secretary of State, who's due to announce his conclusion in the autumn. In the current atmosphere, his decision is about much more than one building. In effect, it will be a verdict on cleaning for the whole of Scotland, and will decide the future of Scotland's most important buildings. Jazz singer and surrealist art expert George Melly grew up in Liverpool and spent the interwar years playing in the city's Sefton Park, and in particular its famous Palm House. 60 years later, the park hasn't aged half as well as George himself, but it's still an inspiration, as he discovered when we took him back there.
Every urban child has a park in his or her life. In my case, it was this one. I used to come here every afternoon with either my mother or my nanny to feed the ducks. And when I return to Liverpool, I still tend towards heading this way and walking here and there and looking at memories. The whole place is buttered with memories.
Through darkest clouds of grey, my heart will always find a way to love and happiness with you.
Sefton represented a Victorian park in its heyday. It was opened in 1872, a very public symbol of civic pride and built at a time of great prosperity. It was intended, like much else, to rival anything London could offer. It had its own Rotten Row, where posh children trotted past on hired ponies. It had its identical statues of Eros and Peter Pan, and even a pirate ship on the lake of the Jolly Roger. The whole design, however, was dominated by the Palm House, Liverpool's own Crystal Palace, centre of my childish world. I find it difficult to explain why it affects me so strongly after all these years, especially now after decades of financial neglect and decay. In this park, Eros has been removed for repair. The Jolly Roger is sinking, and as you can see behind me, the Palm House is in a lamentable state. It's very difficult not to grasp the idea that somehow the decay of this park is a mirror, an echo of what is happening to the city of Liverpool as a whole since the days when its prosperity faded away. The building was boarded up for over 7 years. It was unsafe due to corrosion and vandalism. Now the council has found a little money and work's begun. But no one knows when or if they'll have the cash to finish it in time for the 100th anniversary, which is in 1996. To walk into the Palm House again, that's quite something. I've been able to do that for years. I've often stood and looked at it because it's a legendary building for me, mythical. It's changed a lot, of course. Here and there were very sentimental marble Victorian statues, usually of rather wistful young girls. but it was the contrast between the palms and the exotic plants, nature at its most extravagant, even absurd, contrasted with the rigidity of the architecture, the geometry, and then again, elements of fantasy and decoration, all the little bits of Gothic ornamentation here and there, and the almost railway-like use of girders and so on, all these combined. And as a child, that was my general impression, that there was something of a fairy story, something